into the worn linoleum, and there's mineral deposits on the bathtub. And if you look very closely, the boards beneath the sink have been water stained. She took the trouble to get that damage that remains. And the room overall, it's got this beautiful stained glass window. You get the sense of this was once a really grand place that has fallen on harder times, maybe have been converted to a rooming house. It's past its glory days, sort of run down, and it's so evocative. There's so much, and it's a very modest wooden commode. She knew a room like that. She was either in a space like that and spent enough time to pick up on these little clues, the exhaust, the smudge on the wall that's above the heating vents, and these sorts of things. And there's an awful lot packed into that teeny little space. It's just really extraordinary.
Well, I was amazed to find out that she knit the different stockings and stuff with straight pins.
Yeah.
I'm a knitter, and I just cannot imagine.
That one I speak of, where the woman has her legs dangling out of the bathtub, somebody visited a couple of weeks ago, actually a subject expert in knitting, and she's pretty sure that's crochet, that was crocheted, and it must have been done while it was on her foot. It's very, very fine thread, finer than a sewing thread that was crocheted. The workmanship just on that little booty is extraordinary. Just amazing work.
Well, Frances didn't have a craft store that she could run down to get the supplies that people can get today.
No Michael's or Hobby Lobby.
No. And what's more, these were done during the Second World War, where there's all these material shortages. So, nails and getting the right screws, the metals and materials and these sorts of things. Every little thing was a struggle to acquire.
It's just amazing.
They really are incredible. Did you learn about Frances Glessner Lee in school, or did you discover her later in your career?
I first learned about Frances Glessner Lee in 1992, and I wrote about it for a newspaper of the American Medical Association. I was freelance writing. At the time, American Medical News paid very well. I think it was something like $1,200 for stories about doctors with interesting hobbies. If you knew a doctor who had a vineyard or those sorts of things. And I wrote about a gang of motorcycling doctors and health professionals. And I heard about these dioramas that were made for training police officers. It had a medical angle to it. So I just did the one-off article in 1992, and it just sort of stuck with me. I kept returning to the medical examiner's office to see them and arranging visits. I was one of these people showing up and asking to see the dioramas, as people do. Make a long story short, it was 2012 when coming through on a tour with a group of editors at the new Forensic Medical Center that had just been opened up, and learned about this opening that they had for the assistant to the chief and kind of lucked into it. It was not the sort of thing I could have planned if I had intended to. I could not have gotten into this position, but it's just been just a stroke of great fortune to be in the position where I was.
Well, you're a lucky man.
I'm just glad that there was a lot of information for her, because she did lead such an interesting life.
She had an extraordinary life. Really a shame that her part in the development of the field had really been overlooked until now. She really is the only woman to make a contribution to the area of forensic medicine, and she absolutely revolutionized everything.
Yeah, she was ahead of her time, definitely.
Definitely.
And just the fact that she did not let the fact that Harvard didn't really accept women keep her from...
Well, not just Harvard. I mean, it was the society at the time. She
was supposed to be a housewife.
Yeah, and she did it her way. She used her skills and her force of personality and her money to do what had to be done. And that was really, I think, one of the amazing things about her is that she kept her eye on the goal, and she knew what the objective was, and she didn't let anything stand in her way to get there.
Learning a little bit more about you, what took you down the path to study forensics?
I started out when I was very young. I was an EMT, emergency medical technician, and a paramedic, and that was really my first adult job, adulthood. I did that for a while, and I was down working in Tennessee and not really going anywhere, and was actually a firefighter at one point. Then I tried nursing school, and I hated that. Then somebody told me about a place in Baltimore called Shock Trauma, where they had this legendary trauma center run by this guy, R. Adams Cowley, and doing these things. I heard about this at a Christmas party in December, and by March, I sold everything I owned, and I came up to Baltimore. I just knew that there had to be something here. I went to Shock Trauma's undergraduate program at UMBC in emergency health services, and that's where I ended up finishing my degree. But in the meantime, I had been doing writing. I've been doing freelancing, and I was doing some things here and there just as a hobby. but ended up did a piece for the Washington Post, and I had a thing on All Things Considered, and it was a real thrill. So I got sort of sidetracked into journalism, and I never really worked in the field again. I did that until this opportunity came up at the medical examiners. The thing is that the chief who hired me, Dr. David Fowler, they really like EMTs and paramedics because they train these guys as investigators. The skill set is very similar. EMTs are trained to respond quickly to a scene. You do your assessment of airway, breathing, and circulation, and you transport and you report back your observations to the medical control. And it's very similar what forensic investigators do. You respond quickly to a scene, you observe, and you report back. A lot of overlap, and there's also a lot of overlap between, surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, between journalism and forensic medicine. Very common tactics and strategies. They're both about establishing the facts, determining a fact from an opinion, verifying information, being skeptical, critical thinking, and then distilling what you know into a narrative. That's what a reporter does, and that's what the medical examiner does. They're basically writing the last chapter of a person's life. So it really felt like a natural transition into the area that I'm in now.
What do you have next on your schedule?
There's still things to do with 18 Tiny Deaths. The UK edition is being published by Endeavour, an imprint of Octopus. That's coming out on April 2nd. So there's things there. I've got various appearances here and there and doing some things with 18 Tiny Deaths, trying to work on a follow-up book, trying to get things in the hopper and keep on going.
Where can people go to find out more about you and 18 Tiny Deaths?
There certainly is BruceGoldfarb.com. I do have my own website. I'm trying to keep touch with people that way. I do engage with people on Goodreads. They can follow me there. On Facebook, I interact a lot. There's also a page for 18 Tiny Deaths on Facebook. I'm also 18 Tiny Deaths on Instagram. On Twitter, I'm Bruce_Goldfarb, trying to do the whole social media and interact.
We are also on Reddit, where you were letting people ask questions.
Yeah, and ask me anything. It was something I wanted to do. That was a lot of fun. I wanted to get familiar with that whole process of how to do that. And I hope to do another one in some weeks. Once the book has been out for a while and people have a chance to read it, think of some good questions. That was before the book was even published, so people were only asking about the nutshells. But I hope I can do a real good active Ask Me Anything someday soon.
I guess the question I'd like to ask also is there any future plans for the nutshells to travel?
Over my dead body.
How difficult was that to do the Smithsonian one?
With the Smithsonian, there was a whole team of people. Logistically, it was just an operation. There were several months of preparation, conservation to repair them and strengthen the dioramas. There was a whole team of people who specialize in moving art. It's a whole specialty. And when you think about it, there's sculpture and all kinds of weird things, but this is what they do. And so there was just weeks and weeks and weeks of preparation, constructed these foam core boxes that went in cardboard boxes, and then they had this special truck with this great suspension, and they did them in 3 batches of only 6 boxes at a time. They didn't stack them. They're all on one level, and they were placed between the wheelbase, so it was on a pivot point. There's less vibration, and this whole elaborate thing to get them to Washington, and then they were checked when they were moved there, and then the whole thing in reverse to bring them back. Everything checked when they were returned, and not a thing happened during that move. But they're extraordinarily delicate, 80-year-old artifacts where pieces are held literally by 80-year-old string. Some parts, the burn cabin, for example, it's like literally tissue paper thin. And it was such an operation to move these very gently 35 miles down the street back and forth. Anything beyond that, we get asked all the time, once or twice a year, a museum in Europe or whoever, in all these places, I'm sure they would love to have them on exhibit. But for one thing, Frances Glessner Lee herself said that they are meant for teaching and not for exhibition. But they physically really are not strong enough to do that sort of thing, which is unfortunate. And the exhibition at the Renwick Gallery was in trade for the conservation work that they had done on them. I thought that was a reasonable thing. They put literally hundreds of thousands of dollars of work into the dioramas, And so it was really nice to let the public, I believe it was, over 100,000 people. I went to see them when they were on exhibit at the Renwick.
I think we were in a room with all of them.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
We were there the last day. We definitely wanted to get down there to see them because we didn't know if we'd ever have an opportunity. Oh my gosh, we waited in line for a long time to get in there.
I feel so bad about that. That was the second most popular exhibit that they had in the history of the museum up until that point. And had they known it was going to have that kind of response, they would have laid it out a little differently so there's better traffic flow. And I went several times, and I felt bad even being in the room. I didn't want to occupy any space and take anything away from. I can see them anytime. I don't need this. I just wanted to allow other people to be in the room, but it was extraordinary.
I have to tell you, I know you've been in contact with Liz from Caprico Books, and she told me that she's trying to work something out with you to be able to maybe come see them, and we've told her that we're going to tag along if that ever happens.
I will if I can. The nutshells, unfortunately, have become a victim of their own success. I can't help it that they're written about in Atlas Obscura and people read them. They're in travel guides and these sorts of things, and I try and tell people they're really not on the usual tourist kind of thing when you're visiting Baltimore. It's a working forensic medical center, and people just sort of walk in off the street. They're in town and they want to see the nutshells, and I just can't keep doing that 2, 3, or 4 times a day and spend my day in that room. So we've unfortunately had to close them to the general public. We'll have to see what kinds of things, plus my schedule is getting busy, and I'm the only one who will do it. So it's just sort of really iffy to kind of predict going forward.
Another thing that's in that room also are the
gunshot
wounds. She did those as well.
Yes,
correct?
she did. And in the next room, there are those 3 heads. I don't know if you saw those in that. Right. So those all came from Harvard. That's right.
Wow.
And that was a unique set. Those bullet wound models, they're extraordinary. There was nothing else like it at the time, and they're really amazingly accurate.
In the book, it was interesting that she tried to do it herself with pigs.
That was her idea. There were so many things. I wish I'd known more about that. But yeah, she offered to shoot pigs to make these samples of bullet wounds. It's possible. I'm not certain, so I didn't put it in the book, but I think it's possible that actual autopsies were done at the rocks. There's some reference to it, but I never could document that it actually happened, whether it was just talking about an autopsy or they actually observed an autopsy. But she was quite involved and really very hands-on, so to speak.
She must have been an amazing woman.
I wish I could hear her voice. There's no video of her. There's no movie. People have searched. I would so much like to hear her voice. She did some radio programs. I've searched for the audio, asked family members about family movies, these sorts of things. There's apparently no film or audio of her. I'd so much like to see her and hear her speak.
Oh, yes.
I imagine her being a very no-nonsense speaker and just getting down to the facts. And
yeah. Oh, she did not suffer fools gladly.
Yeah, I was going to just say, she put people in their place.
Pretty
yes.
Well, Bruce, thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us today. We enjoyed this book so much. You did such a good job, especially laying out what forensics was like in the past and how we've gotten to where we are today and how she was a big part of that.
She was indeed. It was just delightful. I'd enjoy talking about my favorite subject in the world. I enjoyed talking with you so much. I'm so glad you enjoyed the book and enjoyed talking with you.
Well, keep us posted when the next book is done. We'd be fascinated to read that one, too.
I will make sure to do that.
Well, you have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
I thought I knew a lot about Frances Glessner Lee, and after reading this book, I realized I didn't know anything.
Well, we didn't know about her. We knew about the nutshell galleries, and we had the pleasure of seeing them, but we didn't know about her life and how she got started. This book really, for a book that told someone's life, some of those can be so dry, but this one was so easy to read. He just took her character and told her story. Very readable. It's not like a textbook.
Oh, he totally fleshed her out. I mean, you felt like
you knew her.
And not just that her relationship with her parents, her relationship with her husband, which I thought was...
That was a good one.
I enjoyed that very much. My first foray into the nutshell galleries was the documentary that John Waters did about them, and that's when I became fascinated with them. And I am still consider it such a privilege that I've gotten to see them twice now. I can see why they don't open it to the public.
They're very fragile. They are just...
But they're still being used as a teaching tool. They need to preserve it for that.
The one thing about Bruce, he's like a